Hey there, folks. Uncle Troy here with another C-word update. This is a blog about my battle with cancer, so if you're looking for one of the happy-go-lucky fun and games videos that I usually put on my channel, feel free to click away to some other video. Just kind of a little update here. I've officially ended my first round of chemotherapy. Actually, it ended a couple weeks ago, but I went to the doctor to discuss that today, and it's a good cutting off point, to separate, the first run from the second run. So I've officially ended my first run of chemotherapy with 3 drugs, oxaliplatin, which is a poison that affects cancer cells, 5-FU, a poison that affects cancer cells, and Avastin, which slows down the growth of new blood vessels and helps starve the cancer cells. And I'd gone through, well, it's supposed to be about 4 months of those drugs. I swear I did not have the slightest rasp in my throat before I started recording. It's all of a sudden hit me. Hold on a second. And I was supposed to have about 4 months of this therapy with these 3 drugs, but I kept having to put it off. I would have a low red blood cell count or a high white blood cell count or a low platelet count, and then we'd have to put off the chemo for a week or 2 until the effects of the last chemo wore off and my blood levels returned to normal. And then in August last year I had to go and have surgery for an anal abscess, which was well, very unpleasant. We won't go into all the details, but it's part of the reason why I'm recording this laying in bed on my side as opposed to sitting in front of the computer. I'm still having side effects from that. But finally got all the drugs I was supposed to in the first run of chemotherapy in, and had another CT scan last Thursday. And let's see if we can see this here. Can't really see it, but I've got a port here. It's a purple power port, and because I had the port, they didn't need to stick a needle into a vein of my arm to provide the contrast dye for the CT scan. CT is kind of a super X-ray, 3D X-ray of your whole body. They was able to use my port, and a funny story about that. Every time they had access the port, and access the port is a fancy way of saying we take this big hook needle and jab it through the skin of your chest into the port. The port's hollow in the inside. You put the needle in, and then this little line runs up into my jugular vein, down into my subclavian vein, straight into the heart. That's a whole other story. You can go back and watch one of my earlier videos to hear about that. But I went to the hospital to have my CT scan done, and they were going to access the port so that they could use it to administer the contrast dye for the X-rays. It shows up different than the normal cells of your body or whatever, so they can learn stuff from it. That's about all I can tell you. So the nurse at the hospital got her, big hook needle and all the other stuff they need, the saline and heparin and whatnot, and got it all gathered up together. And I noticed she didn't have a little syringe. This is a syringe, by the way. Didn't have a little syringe of lidocaine, which they'd always used to numb the skin above the port before they put in that big hook needle. And I asked her about that, and she says, well, you don't have a whole lot of adipal tissue or adipal layers. Basically, I don't have a whole lot of fat in my upper chest here. I've lost like 50 pounds since I started the chemo. Weight that I very well could have lost, or needed to lose, I guess you should say. I was a little overweight, but because of the chemo, I lost a lot of muscle mass and whatnot, not just fat. But she said we didn't have a lot of adipal layers there, which I guess means layers of fat. And she wasn't sure exactly how deep she could, how thick the skin was over the port. It looked awful thin to her, and she wasn't sure exactly the depth she'd need to put the lidocaine, which is a numbing agent. And when you put in lidocaine that close to the surface, it bubbles up and it makes the skin thicker, and so you're not sure if you're getting that hook needle in to as deep as you're supposed to. And I forget what else she was saying, but I thought we were still discussing the possibility if she was going to get up and go get some lidocaine and numb me. And the next thing she said was deep breath, and she jabbed the needle in my chest, which was very, very shocking. I mean, it's just a big surprise to me. Now, to be honest, the pain from the needle jabbing straight in my chest wasn't any different than the pain of the little needle with lidocaine going in, which had been mentioned to me as a possibility before. That it a lot of people skip the lidocaine because it's just one shot, one needle. Either way, one needle with the lidocaine, then you can't feel the big needle, or just the big needle and get it over with. And in the future, I might just go with a big needle and get it over with, because I didn't feel that much difference in the pain. But it just surprised me that she did that, and it was just a big shock. I thought we were still discussing whether or not I was going to get lidocaine. All of a sudden, big needle straight into my chest. But the CT scan, of course, they didn't tell me at the time. They never do. CT scan came back, the doctor told me, and showed that my tumors were smaller. I've got the big tumor and my big mass in my rectum, and then I've got a whole bunch of para-aortic lymph nodes, basically your stomach area, and then I've got some spots on my liver and some spots in my lungs. And the lesions in general, the tumors, whatever you want to call them, in general have gotten smaller since the last scan, and of course much smaller since the very first scan. So it is working, but it's smaller, but it's not as small as she had hoped to be at this point in our treatment. And she described the cancer as stubborn. It's taking a while to get this down. And again reminded me that once you reach stage 4, you're not likely to be cured of cancer, but it can be managed, and so far we're managing. So good news there, and good news is that whatever we're doing is working. It's just not working as well as she would have hoped. So the plan is, as long as this current cocktail is still working, we're going to keep providing it, minus the oxaliplatin. I mentioned in my last video I've got some numbness and tingling in my fingertips and in my toes. It's more annoying than anything at this point. It's not really debilitating. I do have to look when I pick up things so that I don't feel it quite the way I used to. Not completely dead. It's just a little numbness, a little lack of sensation, or whatever. But that's something that doesn't wear off. It's not something that's my sensation isn't going to come back to my fingers probably. And the more oxaliplatin and other drugs we use that cause nerve damage, the worse it's going to get, and it's not going to get better. So we've stopped the oxaliplatin for now. We're going to continue on with the 5-FU and the Avastin. The Avastin is part of the reason why my anal abscess surgery is still healing from it. And why I'm still draining and having pain, because that's not going to heal up. And the 5-FU, unfortunately, is the one that makes me feel bad. Makes me feel bad for days afterwards. It's the one to get the take-home pump. I think I've showed you that. They give it to you over the course of a couple of days. So we're still going to continue with the Avastin, continue with the 5-FU. So I'm still going to feel bad most of the time, and I'm still going to heal slowly, but I won't be getting the medicine that causes the nerve damage. I also discussed, I don't know if I mentioned it before or not, but pretty much every time I blow my nose I get a little blood, and that's from the Avastin. Apparently your nose is constantly developing nosebleeds and constantly healing, especially in the winter when the air gets dry because of the central heating in the air. And mine just heals slowly, so every time I blow my nose there's a little blood. A couple times last week I'm just sitting or standing and all of a sudden feel something warm on my mustache and realize that my nose is bleeding, but it's just a drop or two and then it clears up. So we're going to continue with the Avastin for now, because it's one of the things that helps cancers not grow. Cancers like to send out chemicals that cause extra blood vessels to grow into them. That way they get more nutrients and can grow faster, and the Avastin short circuits that. So the cancers don't get a lot of blood and starve to death, but it also means that things like nosebleeds and whatnot take longer to heal. That's part of the reason why I keep this thing on they took blood today during the doctor's visit, and they put this little squeezy thing that uh, holds down pressure on the back of my hand, and I'm afraid if the I've got a few good veins on the backs of my hands, and I'm afraid they're going to blow and be useless for further blood drawing, because it's a big hassle to access the port for blood. You have to basically sterilize a big chunk of the chest, numb it, or not, as the case may be with the CT scan the other day. Take this big needle, stick it in there, sometimes adjust it, sometimes put in heparin or another drug called Caflo to free up the end, because our body's got a little tube running down into a blood vessel, and the body's trying to heal over that. And so little platelets, fat deposits, whatever, plug up the end of the tube. And if you're putting medicine in for like the chemotherapy or whatever, it just pushes that aside and it flows on into my bloodstream. But when you're trying to suck blood out, it sucks the stuff up into the tube and it blocks it. So I try, and some days I get real good blood return from the port. It just sucks right out. Some days it doesn't. So when they take blood, I usually let them try to take it from the back of my hand, just to avoid all that, because as sure as they access the port just to get blood, that's the day that it doesn't want to give blood. So, like I said, the CT shows that the tumors are smaller, just not as small as the doctor would like to see at this point in the process. So we're going to continue with the 5-FU and the Avastin. We're going to do that about 3 months, assuming I don't have any, bad days with bad blood or low platelets, bad red blood count, whatever, that causes us to delay the treatments. We're going to treatment for about 3 months. 3 months. There we go. For about 3 months. Another set of CT scans and see what's going on. And long term, we talked a little about the long term. Eventually this regimen will stop working and the cells will stop getting smaller. The cancer will stop getting smaller. And then at some point it's going to start getting bigger again. And when that happens, then we'll discuss other methods of treatment. We might start using the oxaliplatin again, even though it's going to give me nerve damage, because it's that or the cancer is going to come back. Or we might try different medicines altogether. But right now, the current treatment has bought me months of life. We still don't know how long I have. Nobody's, aside from, when I first found out I had, I looked up on the internet, and it said the average lifespan was something like 6 months if you don't have chemotherapy, 24 months if you do. But my doctor doesn't believe in putting an expiration date on me. She's not said you have this number of months left. The closest she will come to that is telling me that the chemotherapy we've done so far, since I seemed a little upset that we weren't as far advanced in my treatment as she'd hoped, the chemotherapy so far has bought me months of life. So I've got to keep that in mind, because when you're laying there with the chemo drugs pumping into you and you feel just so bad and you're hurting all over, I can see why people have said, I'll give up. I'll just let the cancer take over to stop the chemotherapy. I can see where they're coming from. I've not reached that point at all. I'm still fighting for every day of life I have left, because I think I've still got more to do in the future, and I know I've got a reward waiting for me, but I'm not ready to go there just yet. I've got too much left to do here. So I'm fighting. I'm continuing the chemotherapy, and I'm just it hurts, but it's better than the alternative. And so I'm going to keep doing the chemotherapy. Like I said, we're going to do it about another 3 months, and then another set of CT scans, and see where we're going from that. And hopefully it'll show that the tumors are still smaller still, and as long as this course of treatment is working, we're going to keep with it. And like the doctor said today, if it turns out this stops working, the tumors stop growing smaller and start growing larger again, then we'll try some different treatment. For right now, we're going to stick with the standard treatment for this type of cancer. And I'm feeling pretty good. I'm a little tired because I didn't sleep well last night because it was before the doctor, and I was, kind of upset and worried, what I'd find out. But I'm feeling pretty good today. I haven't had chemo in a couple of weeks, and that's going to change because tomorrow afternoon I'm going back to start my second run of chemotherapy. So we kind of celebrated today. The good news that the tumors are smaller. Ate out. And now I'm going to take a nap, and tomorrow we're going to start the chemo again. So that gets us up to date, I suppose. Alright, I think I've rambled enough for now. Anyway, short version for those of you that skipped to the end, just for the recap. Tumors are smaller, but not as small as the doctor would like. We're going to keep up the current treatment until it stops working, and then we'll try something else. And so I've added at least a few months to my lifespan by doing this chemotherapy. Even though it makes me feel bad, we're going to keep doing it. So that's it for now. Uncle Troy signing out. Please have a good night.